Hoi! The New World Season 7 patch is here and it is ridiculously long, but it comes with some very important changes. Some major nerfs to PvE, especially for expedition runs, but also some better rewards for them. Some drastic changes to PvP, especially self-healing, but then also nerfs to the fire staff, for example. And various other pretty significant tweaks that will generally change how the game feels, how the game plays. So a lot to talk about. We're going to condense this a little bit. I'm not going to go through every single change, but instead I'm going to focus on the most important ones. I'm going to show you those ones and then skip over some other ones because, as you can see, this is just a ridiculous amount of text to go through, and many of these smaller changes are really just minor fixes that are not relevant for most of you most of the time, or even if they are relevant, you probably don't need to read about them and you'll just feel it when you play the game itself. We will start out with the new seasonal worlds. There's something that most of you know about by now. They are these fresh start worlds that will only last for 3 months. And the first one is with forced PvP. You have to choose your faction when you create your character, and at level 15 you will be force flagged. This will be happening in just a few hours at 5 AM PT. This will be dropping. We'll get a preview of the new Outpost Rush map, Coral Divide. This is only going to be for 1 weekend. They say a central trench divides the battlefield and houses NPCs, building bridges to create new pathways, opening up strategic opportunities for your team. Also, we have the M3 expedition upgrades. The mutations will now be consistent across all mutated expeditions, so they all use the same element at the same time. That may be less relevant now anyways, because of another change we'll get to later. You have the activity finder now allowing you to find M3 expeditions, and some of the rewards have been improved. There are a bunch of new artifacts once again. We have a list of all of them here. I talked about them in a separate video already, so I'm not going to go through all of them. It is worth noting that some of them have a different drop location. This seems to be the case for Heseta and for Artsy. These are also listed as dropping on the Season Pass, so it's likely that they're going to be on the Season Pass first, and then later you can get them in these places, or maybe it's both. Also, there seem to be some changes to the descriptions here, like for example the Void Gauntlet, which now just says heal 100% more health and no longer is tied to the perk. I don't know if this is the final version or the other one was. We'll just have to find out in-game. Throughout Season 7 we'll have Siege of Sulphur again, Legacy of Crassus, and Rabbit's Revenge, obviously with upgraded rewards. The Season 7 Season Pass comes with a free track where you can get Otzi and Takeda, again, as mentioned, some transmog tokens and dice and consumers as well. And then on the premium track that you have to pay 20,000 marks of fortune for, you also get 4 additional transmog tokens and some other stuff. And apparently there is going to be a separate track progression on these PvP servers that is separate from this one, but that requires you to have the premium pass as well, which also unlocks certain leaderboard things, which is apparently how you get the new trophy. It's a bit unclear what exactly you will need the season pass for. It seems like there are certain things that you will need the season pass for in order to get the items that you unlock along the journey. Brings us to combat changes. They fix bugs where the AI cannot hit the player when the player performs certain actions such as crawling, looting, harvesting, or using emotes. Harvesting in particular and crawling could mean quite a few ways to avoid mobs may no longer work. They improved AI turning to be smoother and less likely to snap its turns. This could be interesting in some scenarios. When it comes to expeditions, they have some noteworthy changes or some relevant changes, like for example Shanesh and the Devour sometimes hitting players on the wrong side, but these are really only relevant for you if you're looking for any of these specific changes for a specific expedition, so I'm just going to show them right here. I mentioned they fixed an issue allowing players to push themselves out of the preparation phase barrier in game modes like Invasions, using structures like the Burning Oil Vat. Saying game modes like Invasions makes me think this was probably also possible in Wars. Outpost Rush sees some fairly significant changes outside of the upcoming new map test. Matchmaking now updates your MMR based on personal score instead of just wins and losses. The problem with this is that personal score is still very janky in New World, in my opinion at least. For example, as a tank you will generally have less score because blocked damage isn't a stat that is factored in any way, whereas as a healer you're generally getting a lot of score. Along with that, they also updated the OPR shop offerings. They added a new buildable wall for cover, the Bulwark. This is going to be very interesting, could be a major game changer, honestly. They added the Regen potion. There's some other changes to potions that may affect how relevant this is. And they, more importantly, added the cleansing elixir that we otherwise have in Wars. Fixed an issue that allowed players to jump up the wall at the lunar outpost. And they added a 25% scoring bonus for fighting near capture points in Outpost Rush. One fix that's coming relatively quickly, which actually surprised me, is fixing an issue with the ultimate combat trophy effect being cleansable from the player. That was something that I thought would take them forever to figure out, but they actually managed to get this one done very quickly in comparison. The inventory screen will no longer auto-close when taking damage unless the damage applies a stagger, interrupt, or stun. Kind of interesting. I thought that was kind of a good mechanic to have, so I'm not entirely sure what changes this. I guess against like low-level mobs it's nice to not be annoyed by them, but if someone hits you with some serious damage, then getting kicked out of your inventory might not be the worst thing. Non-target locked AoE spells are now spawned at the position where the spell cast indicator was last placed, not where the camera is pointing by the end of the spellcast state. This is good for me personally because I always disliked the way that it's handled, but it might be bad for players that have a lot of muscle memory for this already. On the other hand, aiming the camera up high when casting Meteor Shower and Rain of Arrows now cast spells successfully instead of failing with no explanation is something that should make everyone happy. They fixed an exploit where players could use a hard rune and menu interaction to basic attack at a faster rate. This was one of the known rapid fire ways. Very glad that one is fixed. There are some input fixes that I'm not going to go through in detail because I don't know which one of those is relevant for you. One that I thought was notable for PC players at least is that you now have separate sliders for horizontal and vertical sensitivity with sliders for ADS and turret operations as well. There are also some changes to the SmartCast options, so generally it's worth checking out your settings if you have specific playstyle preferences. Health and regeneration potions are now more powerful, but they have a shared cooldown. And the cooldown in general has been adjusted to compensate. They have created this new potion category called Survival Potions that will have the shared cooldown. So this is going to be what they're in. And yeah, we might have more other potions in there in the future. For now, we have the 3 standard potions in there being Health Potion, Regen Potion, and Regen Serum. But there are more changes to healing. They increased the tick rate of the passive food healing from every 2.5 seconds to 2 seconds and increased the out of combat bonus to food healing from a 50% bonus to a 100% bonus. They also removed the 20% of burst healing that is removed on hit when consuming food items to compensate for the additional power of health and regen potions. So basically there is no purpose in trying to snack during a fight anymore because you're not getting that burst healing at all. Along with that, they also adjusted the way the ranged weapon persistent damage multiplier is calculated. I'm assuming this is probably going to be a nerf to offset people having less access to regen potions and so on. They reverted the damage scaling that was added to reduce the damage of the blunderbuss to account for target lock. Some changes to that further down. Also, they updated the absorption potions to reduce the potency of creature family ward potions by 50% while active. So for example, if you had a void absorption potions, you would have half of your ancient ward active, which I guess makes sense so you can't quite counter the incoming damage as hard at the same time. So while this is for some reason all under healing functionality, some of this actually affects the PvP in the blunderbuss and also PvE quite substantially, I would say, especially in combination with another change that we'll see here. They added grid to light attack startups when using the 300 con attribute threshold bonus. Now, the wording here is interesting because it says light attack startups. If this is actually what I think it is, then this is the beginning of the animation, not the entire swing, but rather just the very start of it, which would be so that a heavy attack would have grid all the way throughout, because that was kind of what was taken away from heavy attacks as well by taking it away from light attacks. It's the very early grid, and coincidentally that would also give light attacks some grid for the early part of the swing, which apparently, according to Micro, differs quite significantly from weapon to weapon. He specifically said that Void Blade has a very long startup compared to other weapons, which used to be to the disadvantage of Void Blade because there was quite a lot of downtime to actually getting the grid, which made it really not worth it. But now this could turn around and this could actually be one of the weapons that gets quite significant grid while light attacking. So very interesting how this will actually play out, or if this startups is just bad wording and it's actually just like it was on the previous patch. Siege weapons are getting some buffs, particularly the ballista is getting some increased projectile speed, and the gravity drop is getting reduced, and the adjustment is also being made for Outpost Rush. And also you get increased damage absorption and armor while on turrets. Increased armor means this may be particularly interesting for heavy armor builds. And the repeater damage turret coefficient is also increased from 1.2 to 2.2. Sounds like a significant increase. I don't know how much that will actually play out to be in reality. It's also fixed to another exploit with Hard Runes and Void Gauntlet basic attack specifically. For dodging, they fixed some issues where attacks that did not stagger could assist in triggering the breakout dodge, and attacks that did stagger would not increment the breakout dodge, so you should be able to get that more consistently from actual staggers. You no longer lose the ability to move when over encumbered at 150 of your normal equip weight. Instead you move very slowly at prone speed, so you can't get your character completely stuck if you have too much on you. Dashing while swimming now consumes 50 stamina, and if you're encumbered while swimming you can't do the stuff you normally can't do while encumbered. The Greatsword artifact Grace should actually be functioning as intended now with a proper max duration or sprint speed. Survivor's Code and Endless Thirst should now work together properly, which could make them fairly strong on the new patch with the changes to pods in general. Nature's Wrath will no longer be able to provide you with infinite empowers. Fix an issue where Elemental Band was allowing the same damage type to stack multiple stacks of Empower. Strangely, no mention here of Rune Glass or Attunement or whatever, which is also not working as intended, or maybe they just changed that up and they want it to work that way now. We'll find out. They fixed an issue where the Empowered Amulet perk was sometimes duplicating the extension, making empowers last longer than intended. They added additional functionality to the Burning Smite Flare perk to also provide a benefit while in PvP, it says, probably means PvE. Not sure what the benefit will though, they don't mention, they only say it's not armor pen. This next thing here is the most crucial change of the patch for PvE. They adjusted the damage type Shield Ward, not that important, but also the damage type Protection perks to not be able to bypass clamping for absorption. As far as Roger has told me, that basically means you cannot go over 50% absorption anymore by stacking elemental gems, specifically against the mutation that you're in, and you'll just be locked at 50%, which is a very significant reduction in overall absorption, which would make many builds very, very dangerous. A 5-con build would be very difficult to execute, especially in light armor, if you are not getting this extra mitigation anymore, because there are significantly more things that can just one-shot you now. So we will have to see how this actually feels, but it's interesting that they're making this change while also increasing the rewards for M3 and making them more accessible, I guess, through the group finder. But they're not making any adjustments to M3s in terms of difficulty or anything. The only thing they did is make it so that you have all elemental types being the same, which again might not be that relevant anymore because you're kind of overcapping mitigations with that anyways, and you might just go for general elemental protection instead of specific types. They adjusted the Healthy Toast perk to be a heal over time for 4 seconds instead of a burst heal. Same amount, otherwise unchanged, so probably not really competing with the other toast options, especially empowering fortifying toast. Most weapons are primarily getting fixes, so we need to not really go into much detail there, but the blunderbuss is getting increased spread or inaccuracy of the blunderbuss when target locked to an enemy player, and along with that the damage was readjusted backwards to what it used to be. The bow is just getting fixes. Bow players, feel free to read. For the fire staff, they fixed an issue that caused meteor shower duration to be 4 seconds rather than the intended 6 seconds, so quite impactful. They are also nerfing the fire staff slightly. They reduced the disease of emulation from 10% to 10% incoming and 5% outgoing from 20% and 10% respectively. So, respectfully according to them. So this will be a little bit less dominant in wars where it just was the new meta thing for nuking a clump, and it was very good at that. Not quite as relevant for small scale combat in comparison, but for those large scale fights it was big. The last note here is very funny. Reduced the max stacks of that dot from 5 to 4. So a max of 20% weapon damage instead of 25. Very informative. Love that dot. Who knows which one it is. I'm gonna assume that this is Smolder, which would actually affect the Fire Staff quite significantly, because that's the one that has 5 stacks which tick for 5% of damage, and it applies across a lot of different attacks and things the Fire Staff does. So this could be a relevant nerf, which would make sense in the light of the nerf to Regen pods. For the Great Axe, they fixed an issue where the Mauler's Resolve passive would not trigger on attacks that did not trigger a stagger interrupt. This is the stamina gain, so this is quite relevant. Couple of fixes for the Greatsword as well. Once again, if you're a Greatsword player, feel free to read those. The Hatchet, interestingly enough, gets further nerfs. Increased the cooldown of Defy Death from 67 to 70 seconds, and slightly reduced homing max move distance from 4 to 3.75. So the basic attack tracking on the Hatchet is now even worse than it was on the last patch, after it was already nerfed. Really not sure what's going on there, really not sure why that's happening. I don't think the Hatchet is particularly oppressive anymore. Maybe one of the devs just struggles against Hatchet, I don't know. Maybe there's stats that I just don't have insight into, and the Hatchet is actually really, really good still at tracking. I wouldn't prioritize it as a weapon for that anymore, so really strange change in my eyes, one of the strangest in this patch. Bunch of fixes for Ice Gun as well, feel free to read. A couple of fixes and UI changes for the Life Staff. The musket will now be able to aim if prone under collision, which could make for some interesting hiding spots. Fixed an issue with the rapier where abilities would not buffer properly when triggered early enough during the Tondo ability. They also fixed an issue with the rapier having more cooldown reduction than intended. They changed up the Red Curtain passive to have a brief cooldown after each trigger, and fixed some issues where dots could trigger activations of cooldown reduction. Going to be interesting what kind of cooldown reduction that results in after all these changes. There's also another change here that kind of slipped around, which is for the rapier. Adjusted the fuel upgrade for Flourish and Finish will now only proc once per tick of Rapier's Bleed, and not increase by the stacks or number of targets it's on. But the value has been increased from 3.5% to 9%, so 1.5% loss, assuming 3 stacks on one target. I guess this is more relevant against multiple targets. But on the balance side, self-healing increased the self-healing reduction in PvP from 10% to 30%, and this does not apply to potions. I'm sometimes a little bit lost on the whole self-healing versus incoming healing, and I don't know exactly how much this is going to be affecting actual healers healing themselves versus how much it's just affecting life stealing and those kinds of effects. But I think this might be relevant and might be important to be done here in combination with the potion nerf that they're doing, which generally I think will push combat in a better direction if it's not as focused on having so many extra tools to survive. Then the combat sprint delay was adjusted again, slightly reduced the duration of the combat sprint delay when hit from a melee attack for light equip loads from 1 second to 0.85 seconds, and medium equip load from 0.75 seconds to 0.65 seconds. I see this making sense for healers, which are likely getting a nerf through this. I don't really see this making sense for ranged DPS and light armor. I don't think they have that many problems getting away that they would need that, so not a fan of that, but I'm also biased towards melee. For Spear and Sword and Shield, we mostly have fixes here. One thing that is worth mentioning is the Sword and Shield Final Blow passive functionality now only increases threat generation while in heavy equip load, which is nice for DPS builds. And along with that, they reduced the base threat generation of sword basic attacks, but increased the taunt increase that heavy attacks provide. The Void Gauntlet pretty much exclusively gets functionality fixes to how it interacts between different attacks, cancels and all that. And for the Warhammer, they fixed an issue where the refreshing Mighty Gavel perk will not increase in power while on weapons. They fixed an issue where the health bar would show that the player's current health is greater than their max health. That bug has been in the game for so long, I am shocked that they're even tackling this at all. You can also stack as many Gold Cursed Coconuts and Cursed Keys as you like. They changed certain high value weapons from the Doubloon shop to now have fixed attribute perk matching their primary damage stat. This will affect existing Apex Doubloon shop weapons as well as newly purchased ones. They fixed an issue causing some mount attachments and charms to not drop as intended. This was a side effect of some other drop tails that they changed before. The reward for the Containing the Contagion quest, which is in Savage Divide, was reduced from 10 gypsum orbs to 1, but I think there were some issues with getting that quest in the first place. Spectral chests in Cutlass Keys now give 45 to 55 doubloons, up from 14 doubloons. They are now also a source of gold-cursed coconuts. Here's the problem, I have no idea which one the spectral chest is, and I cannot find it on New World Database or New World Buddy. I'm assuming this might be the ones where you have to farm some mobs first, kill some mobs first, and they spawn randomly, and then you complete them. That would make sense to me if it was those in the PvP zone, but maybe not, because who knows? Spectral chest. Schematics from the Hive of the Gorgons raid have had their drop chance increased, and more schematics are now available, and they are saying that that was always the plan, this wasn't a bug. A pretty huge change, the Gorgonite Inductor raid crafting recipes no longer give you Magnify. Instead, you will get a randomly assigned attribute perk if you don't equip an item with the attribute you want, and otherwise you can choose your attribute perk here as usual. I'm unsure if that means you can still select the same number of perks, or if one of them gets sacrificed for this attribute craft mode. I hope not. I hope you can just fully craft the item that you want with the attribute that you want. That would make sense given that they're just the highest value item in the game. The artifacts from the Season 6 Battle Pass have been added to the PvP reward track. Personally, not a fan of adding more things into that track, but there are changes to that as well. The way that artifacts are available on the PvP reward track have been changed. Artifacts are more likely to show up at all levels, and artifacts are significantly more likely to roll on every level after PvP track level 50. So hopefully this means you can actually grind them in a reasonable time now, though I think the main complaint that people had was how much you have to grind to even start farming artifacts at a reasonable rate. Hopefully this part here means that even below 50 you have a decent chance to get an artifact here and there. There's a new way to craft max gear score, which is combining the damaged Gorgon's Eye, which you can get daily from the Hive of the Gorgons and Sandworm, as well as mutated dust, which drops from mutated expeditions, and Azurid Focus, a new crafting material. And with those you can craft an inventory cache that rolls multiple items that can roll up to 725 gear score. So sounds like you will craft these relatively consistently and get a decent chance to get 725. Somewhat similar but not quite the same to the Well. The Azurid Focus here requires a medium level in Arcana to craft, while the caches themselves don't require any high level of crafting. These items were able to roll raid-specific perks, so the PvE perks that we probably saw from the Gorgon's raid, as well as elemental mutation perks, so could be interesting. Blessed Rivets and Jewelry Matrix will now be at the outfitting station instead of the stonecutting station, just in case you're wondering where to find them after the patch. Once you have crafted an artifact to 725 gear score, you can no longer see the 700 gear score crafting recipe. This was done to prevent an issue where players could accidentally craft an artifact at a lower gear score. The arena prematuration was reduced from 90 seconds to 75 seconds. A very nice change. That was always too long of a wait. There's now the option to disable network status icons under gameplay preferences, which is relevant for some of you that have that annoying bug where it just keeps showing up as bad connection. Very hidden, a very important change, particularly for wars. The slider to set the number of visible nameplates has been re-enabled for PC. I think a lot of players will love to hear that one. However, speaking of wars, they already did confirm on the Discord that the bug, the respawn bug affecting wars, is still something they're working on that they haven't figured out yet. So pros and cons, I guess. Wars are still very janky, to say the least. They updated the wording on the Magnify tooltip to make it clear that Magnify can affect your loot drops. Just a final confirmation here that this is the case. Opening the map will no longer cancel fast travel channeling, finally. Gorgon's equipment is finally in the right categories. They removed the player achievements associated with the old faction poaching missions, since those missions are no longer in the game. The achievements, a bit of lacency, adverse possession, righteous sieges, confiscations, and poaching in someone's territory are gone and will not block players from getting the 100% in-game completion achievement. Only took them a couple of years here. And other than that, we have a ridiculous amount of fixes. Overall, these are the patch notes. We'll talk more about the general PvP thing, what we have going on that server, as well as various other things related to the new patch in other videos, so feel free to subscribe so you stay tuned for that. Maybe click the bell as well. And if you'd like to support me further and get early trading tips, one is coming specifically today for the new servers and some stuff on the old servers, then consider supporting me on Patreon. Thanks to all of my patrons who I do exactly that, and thank you for watching. SLOTH, out.